Hello, everyone! I believe you will like today's story since it is about a romance between a prince cursed by dragon blood, who, after winning the war, returns to the kingdom hoping to find his wife. Since during the war he did everything to return victorious, just waiting to find her. But it seems that things did not go as expected, since the person who appears on the day of his return was his wife's older sister and not Irina. Enraged, the prince, filled with dragon blood, demands to know where his beloved Irina is. Enjoy this story that tells about the illegitimate daughter of the Flores family, who is also considered the family's disgrace. She ends up joining the cursed prince with dragon blood from the Empire of Asetria, a despised bastard from a noble house and a cursed prince, a perfect combination made between two disgraces. That was what everyone thought. And so let's begin the story called Tamed the Monster Prince. The story begins with a bride waiting for her wedding without guests on a rainy day. The guards present in the church comment that a wedding that happens in the rain is doomed to have many tears. Remembering how she got to that moment, Irina tries to remember why she had to accept this marriage. She, who was the illegitimate daughter of Duke Flores, was adopted by her biological father, and her mother passed away shortly after due to an illness. Her life in the Duke's house was not easy. She worked like a servant, and she still suffered mistreatment from everyone who worked there, including her half-sister and stepmother. Until one day, her stepmother informs her that she has been chosen to marry Prince Caesar. And as it was the tradition in the Flores family to make empresses, now it was her turn. However, finally, the protagonist realized why she had been brought to that mansion. It was all because of this marriage. The eldest daughter, Giovanetta, was not even married yet. Even so, the proposal was passed to her, the second daughter, and the bastard child. This was because the person in question was the cursed prince. The first prince, Caesar. The prince had fragile health since he was little. He rarely appeared in public. He was the son of the last empress, Adelaide, who suffered from madness after giving birth to him and took her life shortly after. The monstrous prince, this nickname, had always followed him since he was born. No noble wanted their daughter to marry the cursed prince, which is why most rushed to marry their daughters off to others or adopt a distant girl to avoid the marriage. The imperial family attempted 4 arranged marriages, but none of them went through, just because all the noble ladies who were engaged to him ended up dying. That is why the protagonist realized what her role was in that house. She then questions her stepmother if she is going to become the prince's bride, to which the lady responds with a smile, saying that the girl who was born and raised in the streets would now become the prince's bride. Wasn't that incredible? Irina knew that the cause of the previous bride's deaths was never revealed, but people gossiped that it was because of the prince's curse. A marriage like that for her was basically a death sentence. However, obviously her stepmother said that she would be the most desired noblewoman in the empire, and that was a great honor. They were just snake words tempting her with a cup of poison. However, the protagonist had no other choice but to drink from that cup. She then agrees, saying that she will marry the first prince. Thinking positively, an improvement in her social class was something she could not refuse. And that is why this was her choice. Signing the contract, she accepted to become the prince's bride and future empress, knowing that even if it was a path that led her to death, she would have no other choice. Back to the night of the wedding, Irina was alone in the room waiting for her fiancé. For even at the altar, they sent someone else who was not the prince to represent him. Fortunately for her, they did not search her to see if she had anything hidden. Even so, she wouldn't know if she could use it on someone until her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. However, upon looking to see the prince, she is startled. Several guards carrying something resembling a cart, full of chains. The protagonist wondered what was happening. Inside the cart was a man with black hair. The guard releasing the handcuffs informs that this is Prince Caesar. They then lay him down on the bed and leave the room. Irina tries to run, asking them to wait, but the men simply close the door, saying that the sedative effect will wear off soon and he will wake up. This does not help our protagonist at all, who does not know what might happen to her. She questions what she should do since the marriage education she received did not mention anything about this. Although he is cursed, he is still a prince of the empire, and she is being treated as if she were an animal in that cage. Irina decides to approach, to get a better look at the prince. Even scared, she stands right next to the bed, realizing that he does not seem much different from a normal person. However, she ends up seeing something completely unexpected. That man had an arm of a dragon. His face was that of a man, but his hands with black scales and sharp nails were frightening. Suddenly, the prince wakes up as if startled. As he gets up, he seems to feel a discomfort, an incomparable rage, and ends up knocking everything around the room over. A piece of the candlestick falls and rolls to where Irina was hiding, scared for her life. Trying not to make any noise, the protagonist holds her breath. What kind of power is this that destroys things as if it were not even trying? For a moment, the noise stops and Irina wonders if the calming effect has returned. However, when she looks in the direction where the prince was, he is standing still, looking at her with a frightening expression. Thinking that this was her end, Irina remembers people commenting that she was a bastard child, and that is why she was being abandoned to become the fifth victim. Her sister, in the last days she spent at the Flores family mansion, comments that something like her would just be a snack for the prince. So it would be good if she received a gift. After all, anyone would prefer to die than marry a monster and be raped. While crying, Irina knew that she was just something for the Flores family to discard, like a pawn in a game. The only option would be either to die by her own hands or to the monster in front of her. However, there was one thing her sister did not know. Irina takes the dagger she received as a gift and points it at the prince while trembling, thinking that she is a person who has never given up on anything in life and has always suffered to survive. That is why she would never use this dagger on herself. After all, in the end, the one who survives is always the strongest. Desperate as her last resort, while threatening the prince, Irina screams for him to stay away. However, she is startled when she looks into his eyes, while he, not understanding, repeats what she just said as if trying to understand what it means to stay away. She simply orders him again not to come closer. However, the prince does the opposite and practically stands inches from Irina's face, with only the dagger between them. Irina questions what he is doing, not understanding why he is getting so close. But suddenly, as if the prince had been taken over by something, he starts to grunt and walk around the room after a noise. Irina tries to understand what he is doing, but the dragon just falls to the ground with his hands on his head, while trembling, which makes the protagonist realize that he seems to be afraid. But she cannot understand what exactly he is afraid of, until she realizes that outside another thunderclap cuts through the sky, making a loud noise. Thus, she can perceive that he is probably afraid of the thunder. After the noise passes, the tremors improve a little, and the prince, with tears in his eyes, looks at Irina seeking comfort, which leaves her perplexed since a man known to be a monster is trembling in front of her, afraid of a thunder. However, if she is right. Thus, the protagonist, even scared and trembling, brings her hand closer to the prince's face, until she touches him, believing that he is not actually a monster, but just a beast in fear. In this way, she tells him that it is okay. After all, the noise is loud, but it will not hurt him. Realizing that he is calmer, Irina says that nothing bad will happen. But of course, things are not that simple. For at that moment, another thunder illuminates the window, making a loud noise. The man screams as if he is trying to hold back an internal pain, but his dragon hands begin to twist. Irina panics again, trying to calm him down. Realizing that perhaps she will not be able to, it might be better to use the dagger again. However, fearing that he might react violently, Irina tries to reach for it without alarming the prince. It seems that it is too late because he grabs her hand, thus trapping it beneath him. At this moment, Irina realizes that the prince's appearance is completely different, with fangs and scales on his face. He presses the wound she just made with the dagger before falling to the ground with his claw. And as if drawn to it, the prince approaches that wound. The defenseless protagonist thinks about what she could do to get free, but he is much stronger than her. But she is surprised by something warm in her hand. As if he desired her blood, the prince licks the wound. Soon after, he bites her hand to draw more blood. Realizing that he has loosened his grip on her, Irina manages to sit up and asks him to stop. When she looks at the prince again, she notices that his appearance has returned to that of a human again, with that innocent look. No matter how much she can't understand the reason, Irina believes it is probably something related to her blood. Realizing that this way he no longer seems like an uncontrolled monster, but just the oversized beast. After some time, he ends up falling asleep in the protagonist's lap. She is impressed by how he can sleep as if nothing had happened. Although he acted strangely, it didn't seem like he wanted to hurt her. She believes that maybe he could just be in a situation similar to hers. The important thing now is that, contrary to what everyone imagined, she managed to survive this night. As the sun rises, the guards open the door complaining that they will have to clean up a body again. But the situation is not at all what they expected. Irina is still sitting on the floor asking them to be quiet while the prince sleeps in her lap. However, the shock is so great that one of the guards ends up dropping his spear on the ground, making a very loud noise. This startles the prince, making him go into defensive mode again. Irina quickly hugs him and asks him to control himself and not do that. This seems to be quite effective since he responds quickly. And as always, he just repeats what she just said. The protagonist agrees and tells him not to do that. Besides promising that she will do everything possible so that no one hurts him again, he should behave, which the prince finally seems to understand and responds in agreement. Shocked by the interaction between the two, the guards are still standing at the door, until one of them asks to report quickly to His Majesty. Meanwhile, in the palace garden, a maid informs the red-haired woman that the first prince and his wife safely completed their first night of marriage. Beside the woman, two clearly injured maids tremble while kneeling. This is Empress Cornelia, who finds the news incredible. Cornelia had been the emperor's mistress since he was still the crown prince, but only after the death of the former empress did she obtain the title. Her son Matthias was the second prince, and it took 20 years for him to be considered the true son of the emperor. The maid questions what they will do with the girl, trying to avoid the word bastard since Cornelia is extremely sensitive to this topic. To which the woman responds that now that the two are officially married, his wife will need a residence. And she orders the maid to inform everyone that the prince's wife will stay at the Jade Peridot Palace. The maid agrees, knowing what that palace truly is. Cornelia questions the girl's name again, to which the maid responds that it is Irina. Then Cornelia says that they all die so quickly that it's hard to keep track. And she questions how long this one will last, joking that perhaps this one could even manage to steal Cornelia's own place. Asking the maid to inform Irina that the empress would like to have tea with her soon. A priest was called to verify the situation, saying it is a miracle. It is impressive to see that the young lady is still alive and expected from a descendant of the Flores family. Irina realizes that indeed everyone expected her to be dead, even herself. Seeing the maids take away those blood-stained bed linens, she remembers what happened last night and her hand wound. However, it was good that it happened this way, because now no one can contest that the marriage is indeed valid. When she believed she could finally breathe because she was safe, the protagonist was taken to her new chamber in the palace. That was the place the empress arranged for them, a practically abandoned, dirty place, looking as if it were in ruins. The empress's maid tries to pretend that it wasn't intentional and that everything just happened suddenly, and questions if perhaps the lady did not like the residence. Irina knows she cannot confront the empress, and she herself has been through much worse situations, so she just says no, and that she liked the place very much. Making a bow, she asks the maid to thank the empress for the care she is receiving. The woman says goodbye and tells the princess to rest now. Once inside the residence, it doesn't seem so dirty. And lying down on the bed, Irina is able to breathe for the first time in days. She thinks that even though it is an imperial palace, nothing seems very special or different from what is outside. But if she thinks about the treatment she received at the House of Flowers, the situation here is somewhat modest. The maid knocks on the door, saying she will be responsible for the princess's bath. And when she enters with a bucket of water, Irina gets up, saying that she will take a bath herself, and that from this moment on, the maid does not need to help her with the bath. The maid leaves, and when Irina tries to get up, she realizes that her heel is quite hurt. Later, at mealtime, Irina is sitting alone at the table with a plentiful amount of food until she asks where the crown prince would be. The maid replies that he will arrive soon. She remembers that the empress's maid communicated that both the crown prince and the princess would stay at the Jade Palace. Hopefully. However, he had not appeared all day. Irina believed that if he stayed together, it would probably be good for her, since, like it or not, he is the crown prince. Suddenly, a guard says that the crown prince has arrived. Irina is happy that he finally appeared, but not in the way she expected. Again, he is full of chains on his body, imprisoned, being dragged by the guards. The protagonist is outraged. It is absurd what they are doing to the prince. The guards still shout for her not to approach, as she might get hurt. The prince is clearly uncomfortable. Then, using his dragon strength, he breaks the chains. The guards panic, shouting for everyone to stay away, and the prince then starts to charge at them. One of the guards manages to pull the chain around his neck and restrain his hand with a spear. Meanwhile, Irina tries to free herself from the other guard, asking them to stop treating the prince this way. The poor prince is being choked, pushed, and they put a cloth, probably a sedative, over his face. A few seconds later, he stumbles and falls to the ground. The guards then warn to put the chains back on. Taking advantage of the fact that he is calmer, Irina is perplexed. How is it possible for them to treat someone, a human being, this way? And still, the guard says, before leaving, that he recommends the princess not to touch the muzzle or the chains if she wants to keep her fingers intact. Moreover, he gives her something, which Irina believes to be a sedative, leaving just the two of them in the dining room. She realizes how hurt the prince is, not understanding the reason for so much aggression. Looking closely at the prince, Irina notices that he did not have any of those injuries on his face in the morning. Furthermore, why do they keep putting a muzzle on him, as if he were an animal? How will he be able to eat in this condition? until she notices something on the floor. Apparently, raw meat and animal tongue. Horrified, she can't even imagine what the prince has been going through in this castle until today. In disbelief, how cruel humanity is to both of them. But she is interrupted by the prince complaining. She then says that she will free him quickly, and remembers the soldier's words advising not to remove the chains or the muzzle if she wants to keep her fingers intact. Hesitating for a moment, Irina decides that this doesn't make sense. It is not normal to treat a person this way. So she calls out his name, Caesar, and warns that she will free him. He protests, but still, Irina pulls to remove the muzzle first, saying that she will not hurt him. And as soon as she removes it, she looks at the prince's face, still irritated, and tells him that he is fine now, that he doesn't need to worry. However, he starts to writhe again, as if trying to hold back a very strong pain. Irina notices that those dark scales have reappeared on his skin again, and with a roar, the prince manages to break the shackles. Irina gets up, stepping back a little, apprehensive about what is happening, and those words from the guard do not leave her mind. She remembers the sedative he gave her, saying that if something happened, she just had to throw that jar in the prince's face. Then, she finds the jar in her pocket, wondering if she should use it, but Caesar manages to hold back that rage. While Irina trembles, scared for her life, holding the vial, the light reflecting on the lid of the vial in her hand makes the prince remember the shine that the light makes on the tip of the spear that hurts him. And again, he starts to lose control. Irina slowly approaches, telling him that it's okay, that everything will be fine, but he can't contain himself. With a quick strike, he hits her hand, causing the vial to fall to the ground. And Irina realizes that maybe he really has lost control this time. She thinks that if she used the vial, how different she would be from those people who mistreat him and treat him like an animal. Feeling a sharp pain in her hand, Irina realizes that when he pushed the vial from her hand, he ended up making a cut. She notices that it's a similar situation to what happened the night before, and he managed to return to normal as soon as he licked her blood. This is her only option at the moment to calm him down. Offering her bloodied hand, Irina asks if the prince wants this, and if he does, she will give it to him. Still without a response, the prince just growls, not moving from his spot. While trembling, Irina keeps her hand outstretched so he can see the blood. He quickly approaches and drinks the blood from her hand. The protagonist feels a wave of heat coming from the spot where he is touching, but witnesses him returning to normal and calming down again. In this way, she realizes that, for some reason, every time he takes her blood, he can control the dragon inside him and return to being human. It would be better if no one found out about this, especially since he already has the curse of having dragon blood. And now, if people discover that he has a thirst for blood, it will be worse for him. Irina pulls her hand back, a bit embarrassed, saying that it's enough. However, he holds her and brings his face closer to hers. The protagonist is left speechless, not understanding what he is trying to do, until he starts to smell her neck. Then she realizes that he still wants more blood and asks him to stop. Caesar does his best to resist that smell. He pushes her to the ground, pinning her beneath his body. The prince begins to lick Irina's neck, and even though she is asking him to stop, feeling something strange, he continues using her like ice cream. Realizing that she is completely immobilized, she notices that she is scared. She keeps asking him to stop doing this, as things are getting a bit erotic, until she screams for him to please stop. Finally, the prince seems to have come back to himself and just repeats her words. Irina says that he can't do this, because if he pulls her blood like that, she could end up dying. Upon hearing these words, the prince seems to understand and is in shock, just saying no. The protagonist agrees, saying that she doesn't want to die, so he shouldn't do this. Caesar reaches out and wipes the tears from her face, saying the word no several times as if he really feels bad thinking about it. Irina realizes that he probably understands what death means, which is why he was upset thinking that she could die. Trying to treat him like a human for the first time, the protagonist introduces herself, saying that her name is Irina. Noticing that he has a bit of difficulty repeating the name, she says that her mother used to call her Ren, which he seems to say much more easily, repeating the nickname Ren several times while smiling. The protagonist is caught off guard, as she has never seen that expression on him, but she is happy that they seem to be understanding each other. Irina explains that now they are married, which the prince just repeats the word without fully understanding the meaning. She knows that no one expected her to survive this marriage, especially the empress who rejects her and Caesar. So it doesn't matter what position Caesar has today in the palace, but she knows that he is her only ally at this moment. Then she explains to him that she is on his side, which clearly confuses the prince. So Irina explains that they are like a team. Therefore, if anyone tries to hurt him again, he must tell her immediately. He questions what it means to hurt. But as soon as she responds that it's what those guards do to him, Caesar becomes clearly irritated, shouting the word "no" several times. With this, the protagonist knows that negative words are recognized much more easily by him. This proves that he must have been very mistreated in this place. Raising her hand, Irina says that they should make a promise. Obviously, the poor guy doesn't understand anything. She takes his hand and intertwines their pinky fingers, saying that this means a promise, asking if he understood. Smiling, the prince says yes, promise. But Irina knows that he must have understood the word, but probably didn't comprehend the meaning, returning to the reason why they came to this room, which was because of the food. The protagonist corrects Caesar, telling him not to eat with his hands and to try using utensils. She even tries to show him practically how to do it. However, looking like a little bird waiting for food in the nest, he just opens his mouth to receive the food from the fork. Unable to resist the cuteness, Irina feeds him. He happily accepts it while chewing. The protagonist realizes that although he has an adult body, his mentality seems very much like that of a child. Suddenly, someone interrupts them by knocking on the door. As soon as the person enters, both of them go on alert. An elderly lady approaches, calling him, "Your Majesty." The surprised prince calls the person Meshe. Irina notices that the prince might know this person and asks who she is. The lady apologizes for her arrogance and introduces herself as Mercedes, the servant who took care of the prince. She explains that she has served the prince for many years, and as soon as she learned that they had moved to the Jade Palace, she came as quickly as possible. The protagonist realizes that she was probably the prince's nanny and also served the former Empress Adelaide. However, the lady comments that the prince has been much more sensitive lately, and she is worried because the knights have stopped using the calming potion recently, which shocks the protagonist that the lady knows what is happening and hasn't done anything until now. But before she can argue further, she notices that the lady is crying. Mercedes then apologizes, saying that she simply didn't have enough power to prevent this from happening to the prince. Irina is moved and thinks that perhaps that woman hasn't done so much harm after all. But giving my opinion, I don't trust her. And I think the protagonist shouldn't trust her either. If that lady really served the former empress, she probably came from a noble family of great prestige. Even so, the protagonist noticed that she has very calloused hands from doing domestic work, and perhaps that was for the prince's sake. Mercedes asks Irina how she managed to control the prince. After all, he never listened to anyone before, and in the past, he sometimes even refused her care. Therefore, she would really like to know how the princess managed to calm him down enough to be sitting at the table eating now. Irina remembers when he drank her blood, but she can't just say that he calmed down by drinking her blood. After all, no one would believe that. Moreover, if the gossip spreads, they might even accuse her of using black magic and charge her with witchcraft. Irina remembers when she was little. She was walking down the street and saw the execution of a witch. When condemned, no matter how noble the person is, they will instantly be worse than a homeless person. The witch was tied to a stake all day while being stoned by passers-by, and in the end, her body was burned slowly until her death. Just to make her pay for all her sins, she must suffer slowly. Noticing that Irina has gone pale, Mercedes asks if she is okay. And remembering all this, Irina decides that she will really hide this fact and just responds to Mercedes that she is fine. The prince suddenly puts his hand on Irina's shoulder, calling her Ren, and with an expression that shows he is worried about her. The protagonist understands his look and says that she is fine and that he doesn't need to worry. Mercedes realizes that the interaction between the two is much more than she imagined, and comments that the prince probably cares a lot about the princess, which she awkwardly agrees with, still trying to think of a strategy on how to avoid ending up like a witch. But at night, Irina is lying in her bed and remembers Mercedes' words telling her to rest. After all, the next day, she would have tea with the Empress, so she needed to prepare many things for tomorrow. The protagonist is worried because she knows that the Empress doesn't like her. Even so, she closes her eyes and tries to fall asleep, knowing that tomorrow will be a stressful day. But suddenly, something pulls her foot. This makes her scream and look to see what it is. However, it is the prince. Pulling her foot out of nowhere in bed, Irina asks what he is doing. He, with a completely innocent face, laughs while playing with her foot. Irina tells the prince that he scared her and that he shouldn't even be there but in his own room. But since she knows that no useful response or attempt at argument will happen, she gives up. And while lifting her blanket, she asks him to come lie down beside her, what was clearly the prince's intention from the beginning, since he is happy and responds yes. Lying on his side, all excited, Irene thinks it's perfectly fine for them to sleep together. After all, they are married. Then she lies down again to try to sleep. However, the prince starts to move in bed, getting closer to her, and he stops just when she calls his name. Irina starts to laugh, thinking that it has been a long time since she felt someone's warmth while sleeping. The prince this time doesn't understand at all why she is laughing. Then she asks him to come closer, saying that if they hug, they will sleep better, which the prince agrees to, calling her by the nickname Ren as she drifts off to sleep. He then gets up and gives her a goodnight kiss on the cheek. This shows that this prince is much cleverer than we imagine. In another room in the palace, someone asks the butler if the bride survived. He agrees. A man with red hair is shirtless, lying on his bed, commenting that probably the elders will be very excited about this news. Very handsome, by the way, but clearly problematic. This is Matias de la Rosa, the second prince of the empire. The fundamentalists among the conservatives support Prince Cesar as the heir apparent, even ignoring his mental state, only thinking about his legitimacy as the first prince. What Matthias knows is that, in fact, what they want is just a puppet as emperor. Due to the long war with the demons, 3 allied powers were established on the continent: the Assetria Empire by humans, the Hibarium Forest by elves, and Stoican, the Union of the Dwarves Steel. Therefore, the Emperor of Assetria can only be recognized if all allies agree, and he knows that the other 2 monarchs have always wanted an emperor who would be favorable to them. Matthias asks the butler which noble house the lucky girl came from, to which he replies that it is from the house of Duke Flores. He then remembers that it is indeed the house of the hero who hunted the light dragon. Perhaps it is true that the blood of the great sage can suppress that of the dragon. He also comments that it is impressive how they could give their daughter to that idiot. The butler approaches and whispers that, in fact, she is an illegitimate daughter, and Matthias says that her mother must have been furious. After all, a descendant of Cosimo is still a descendant. Before the butler can respond to this comment, the prince says he doesn't want to know more about this subject. Putting on his clothes, he says he never had the habit of watching women on the brink of death, but if he had known she would survive for so long, he might have shown up at the wedding, saying that it doesn't matter since they will meet soon. Elsewhere, a man shouts, telling the person to confess the truth immediately, saying that the maid touched Her Majesty's belongings. While crying, the maid says it wasn't her. She swears it wasn't. The others shout that it was indeed her, that she is guilty. As they drag her out, she screams that no, that in fact it was someone else who touched the belongings. At this moment, Irene wakes up from her dream, but unable to remember 100%, she only has the feeling that she had a very serious dream. Realizing that the prince is sleeping beside her, Irina comments that with his eyes closed and sleeping, the prince really looks just like a very handsome nobleman. A commotion begins to happen outside, and Irina wonders what is going on. One of the maids notices that the princess coughed inside, so she probably just woke up. At the door of the room, she asks if the princess needs anything, while the other maids are clearly irritated about something. Irina cannot understand why there are so many people at her door and what is happening. She then questions why there is such a commotion. One of the maids looks at the girl who is kneeling on the floor, and with a mischievous smile, she begins to say that that person touched the prince's belongings, while the others confirm that they saw with their own eyes and it was indeed Delphina, so she must be sent away. Irina is impressed by the lack of respect from these maids. Calling then the one who seems to be the leader, she asks her to explain what is really happening. This is Elda, the head maid of the palace they are in, and she is even impressed by Irina's superior attitude, because she heard that in fact the princess had been raised on the streets for being a bastard child. Elda then tells that in the morning, while they were cleaning, Sarah noticed that Delphina was touching the prince's belongings, and because of that, they all went there to report the incident. Irina says she understands, but in reality, she knows very well what lies behind those malicious glances. After all, it's the same look the staff gave her when she entered the flower house. The treatment for a motherless and illegitimate child, hated by the lady of the house, was worse than that of a common servant. Even those maids who started with the heaviest tasks managed to gain titles and influence after 10 years. Some even managed to save enough money to move on to another job or even start a business. However, that was never allowed for someone like Irina. Bearing the name of the flower house, she was doomed to stay in that house for the rest of her life, being treated worse than a servant for over 10 years within the duchy. Precisely for that reason, she can perceive the true intentions of those maids. This was supposed to be some kind of prank, where in reality, the Lord cannot know if that valuable item was really stolen or not. The protagonist then draws Elda's attention, asking if this wouldn't be her job, saying that this is totally rude on her part, failing to properly handle her master's belongings and neglecting the education of her subordinates. and on top of that, making a scene outside the master's room, even before they woke up. Irina questions where her manners are. Elda tries to retort, saying it was unintentional. However, Irina stands firm, saying she doesn't want to know what happened, but how Elda will behave in this mansion. The others, realizing the authority, begin to see that it won't be as easy as they imagined. Irina knew that what they thought, that a woman who married a prince who is a monster wouldn't have such authority or even the audacity, was a mistake. So Irina asks who ordered them to work in this palace. Elda replies that it was an order from Countess Elvira. The protagonist further accuses that Elda's arrogance is tarnishing the Countess's name. Elda is shocked to think that this could really be seen unfavorably by the Countess. Irina confirms that she should then report everything that happened directly to the Countess, which clearly frightens the maids. The protagonist knows that if they are not afraid of her position, they probably fear the person who ordered them, and that's why she invoked the Countess's name. And the response was immediate. Elda kneels, asking for forgiveness, saying it's her fault, that it was just a mistake, and that she will take responsibility for it. Irina is tired of hearing so much nonsense from these women, talking about guilt, negligence, mistakes, as if they had never done this before. Precisely on the day of the wedding, they commented that a bride who marries on a rainy day will only shed tears while laughing at the situation. And that's why Irina knows that everything started that very morning of the wedding. And if this is just a revenge to survive in this palace, Irina will need to show her strength. They all scream, asking for forgiveness, saying they were wrong. Turning to go back to the room, the protagonist says that if they are going to continue causing a commotion there, she doesn't want to see any of their faces anymore, and therefore, they must leave immediately without drawing attention. Noticing that the first accused is still quiet and crying, Irina remembers the rude words they used against that girl. Then Irina realizes that she dreamed of this moment yesterday, and wonders if she might be imagining it. However, in her dream, she was sure that the one responsible for everything was precisely the one who was most hostile among them. Irina questions whether she is going crazy or if she really saw the future. She calls one of the maids who is further back and tells her to go call the guards, warning to bring the guard immediately. While the rest will wait in that same place, as soon as the guard arrives asking if the princess called, Irina calls that girl who is being rude and accusing the other. The girl panics, hiding her pocket, saying it's nothing. Well, the protagonist orders the guard to check what's inside that pocket. While the guard holds the girl, she continues screaming that she didn't steal, that it was the very Delphina, and that the princess can't do this to her. However, as soon as the guard gains access to her pocket, he is also surprised, showing a diamond necklace that was there. Irina, confronting everyone, says that they were sure that the one who touched the prince's belongings was precisely the Delphina. So why is the stolen object in someone else's pocket? At that moment, even Elda doesn't know what to say, as she was also deceived. Irina says that theft is a serious matter and is usually punished very harshly. Then she orders the guards to take everyone for interrogation. Delphina, who is the only one left from that mess, is very happy that the princess believed her. Irina realizes that if she hadn't had that dream, or noticed that this was a setup, that girl would probably have been the only one punished. Back in the room, the protagonist sits on the bed and realizes that she can't quite understand what happened, but it made her realize that she needs someone by her side, someone she can truly trust within the imperial palace. At that moment, the prince wakes up and calls her. With the innocence of not knowing the slightest about what just happened and what is going through the protagonist's mind, Irina tries to ignore all those problems and is happy that the prince has woken up and is calm. She caresses his face, and he seems like a happy little puppy receiving affection, which makes Irina remember how kind and cute he is, while at the same time he has gone through inexplicable things and situations up to this moment. And precisely because of those things, in difficult and frustrating moments, he ended up having to act rudely. She then says out loud that she is determined to change that. After all, they are in the same boat, so she needs to solve the problem for both of them, which the poor prince doesn't understand at all. Just thinking about protecting both of them, she knows that at this moment she will need as many people she can trust around her. And to do that, she needs to talk to the Empress as soon as possible. However, someone knocks on the door, interrupting their conversation, saying it is Mrs. Mercedes. She says she was looking for the prince because he wasn't in his room. However, she is surprised to see how close the relationship between the princess and the prince is. And as a way to show that they really are, the prince starts to hug the protagonist even more, who quietly asks him to stop. Mercedes says she has something to tell both of them, that this afternoon there is a tea scheduled with the Empress. I don't understand why the protagonist seems surprised, since the lady had already informed her about this yesterday, but I think with the mess she ended up forgetting. She says she has something to ask the Empress anyway, questioning Mercedes if by any chance the princess has the authority to recruit new servants. Before answering this question, Mercedes says she really heard about the commotion that happened earlier, and the princess did the right thing since the maids were being very arrogant. The protagonist says it was indeed a shock, and asks Mercedes if the servants in this place usually behave this way, and if they have always treated the prince poorly. Mercedes explains that all the servants in this place answer to Countess Elvira, but they sometimes act as if they are carrying the Empress's own power on their backs. Even so, the protagonist questions how they can treat a person this way while looking at the prince. Then she decides to ask a favor from Mercedes. Since Irina came to the palace without any servants from her family, she really has no one to count on here. So until she can get a loyal servant, she asks if she can trust Mercedes. She is clearly moved, saying it would be an honor if her strength could be of any help to the princess. A maid interrupts the conversation, saying that the princess needs to get dressed, as lunchtime is close to tea time. Irina asks if the prince isn't going with her, and Mercedes says that the Empress is reluctant to meet with the first prince. And Caesar already shows why, getting furious and saying Cornelia no. The maid is surprised, I believe, because it is the first time she has seen the prince speaking, and even more so in a hostile manner. She is also surprised that the prince is totally against the idea of meeting or talking to Cornelia, which he shows a completely dark expression just by mentioning her name. Irina wonders if the blood he consumed last night is already starting to wear off, and asks the two to leave, as she needs to talk to the prince alone. After the two leave, Irina lies on the bed, waiting for the prince to take her blood, and she realizes that no matter how many times she looks into his eyes, when he is in this form, they always scare her. She calls his name, but that seems not to work. Then he approaches her neck, which she asks him not to do there. He starts to lick her neck, and Irina becomes worried because as she is going to meet the Empress, she wouldn't want to have any visible marks. To try to make it easier and not let him mark wherever he wants, she bites her own hand, and the smell of blood seems to have worsened the situation for the prince. Showing the blood dripping from her hand, Irina offers for him to consume it. As if hypnotized, he approaches her hand and bites, consuming that blood. I don't know, but this curse he has is more like a vampire than a dragon. But okay. He then licks a bit more of the blood from her hand while Irina suffers from the heat she feels when he does this. And as she feels increasingly dizzy, she questions whether it is right to do this and if it will cause any problems. She also hopes that she is not doing anything that will harm the prince. After a while, the maids come in to help the princess get ready. Irina tries to be curt with them, just asking them to do her hair and makeup simply, so as not to draw attention. But since the clever one made a bite on her own hand, now she needs gloves. And the maid asks if she would like help putting on the gloves. Obviously, Irina refuses and puts the glove on herself. Since the guards had already seen that she had hurt her hand on the first night, it's not a problem for her to use this excuse to continue hiding her hand. Already ready for tea with the Empress, she says goodbye to Caesar. He clearly becomes uncomfortable and tells her not to go. The protagonist tries to explain that this is something she has to do and it doesn't depend on her. But like a spoiled child, he just keeps saying no. Mercedes tries to intervene, saying that the prince is putting the princess in a difficult situation since she needs to go. And because of that, Mercedes says she will stay with the prince while the princess has tea. Irina then waves, saying she will be back soon. But Caesar does not seem happy about this at all. The guard announces the arrival of the princess heir to the garden. However, for some reason, she does not seem to be very well. Walking with difficulty and sweating a lot, Irina seems irritated since the Empress did not notify the location beforehand. And apparently, she chose the farthest place from the Jade Palace possible. While the guard laughs at the difficulty Irina is having, perhaps the Empress knows that she cannot walk properly for long. As soon as she arrives, a maid warns the princess to bow to the Empress, who is sitting just observing the deplorable scene of the princess and waiting for the bow, testing her authority over the princess. Obviously, Irina is clever and performs the formal bow, introducing herself and offering her respect to the Empress, which seems sufficient, but somehow bothers the Empress. Silence permeates the place, and the protagonist maintains her position. Even in pain, to show respect, she cannot rise until the Empress accepts her greeting. Finally, the Empress accepts the princess's greeting, and with difficulty, Irina stands up, but she ends up losing her balance and almost falls, being helped by Delphina, who came to accompany her. The Empress holds back a laugh, while Irina thanks the maid for her help. The maid then guides the princess to the table to sit down. The Empress waits a bit before starting to ask questions, first questioning how the princess is adjusting to life in the imperial palace. Hesitating a bit to speak, Irina says there is something she would like to report first. the Empress seems to not like this very much and doesn't even respond. Then the protagonist says it relates to the first Prince Caesar. After being given permission to speak, Irina says she doesn't know if it was a maid or a guard, but they are mistreating the prince. The Empress questions what she means by that, and the protagonist explains that the prince's body is full of bruises, and he was also chained and inside a kind of cage. Before responding, she takes a drag from her cigarette and still blows the smoke in the protagonist's face. Then she questions the princess what she expects the Empress to do with this information. Irina is shocked. Although she knows the Empress does not like them, she thought perhaps she wouldn't allow the staff to disrespect the first prince. She tries to counter-argue, but the Empress cuts her off before she can continue, saying that not everyone deserves to be treated as a human being, and still asks Irina what she thinks characterizes someone as being considered a human being. Answering her own question, she says that a person must act as such to be treated as a human being. While raising her voice, she asks if by any chance the princess has ever seen the prince behave like a person. Releasing the bird on the table, she explains that a person usually walks straight, uses tools, and speaks just like all of us. At that moment, the bird says the word hello. This leaves the protagonist terrified, as she knows it could be referring to either her or the prince. To finish, the villain even asks if the princess could differentiate the first prince from this bird. Suddenly, she grabs the poor little bird and squeezes it a bit too hard, creating a lamentable scene worthy of imprisonment in front of the protagonist. Stopping the mistreatment of the little creature, she adds that this bird is much more useful than the first prince. After all, at least it obeys commands. Thank God she releases the little creature, which flies far away from this crazy woman who mistreats animals. I take back what I said. The poor thing returned to the crazy woman, while she says that Caesar is an irrational beast that has no control. And when a creature acts irrationally and without purpose, it must naturally be tamed in the harshest way. Finding this completely normal, she asks the princess for her opinion on this. The poor girl is perplexed and can only say that Caesar... However, the Empress interrupts, saying that he is a beast that needs to be controlled. Irritated, Irina stands up, saying that he is not an animal, and she realizes that she has further irritated the crazy woman, who starts laughing hysterically at the situation, saying that the princess is funnier than she imagined. Irritated by the lack of respect towards her and her husband, Irina comments that, as the Empress herself said, the crown prince is different from the others. Before she can finish her sentence, the protagonist knows that the way he loses control and desires human blood, that arm that turned into a dragon's paw, the gaze that often resembles that of a furious beast. Clearly, all of this is indeed a sign of the curse. However, now she completes out loud, remembering his serene gaze and true smile. She says that the prince is definitely human. Losing patience with the princess, the Empress comments that she probably takes very good care of her husband. After all, a bastard raised on the streets and without any power really needs to rely on her stupid husband. Shocked, Irina cannot believe what she just heard. Besides not accepting Caesar's position and not treating him as a human being, they also see her the same way, as a fool without power. It is clearly difficult to convince someone who does not see either her or her husband as human beings. The protagonist decides to bargain, asking if, in case the Empress witnesses the prince acting like a human being, would she recognize him? Saying that she will do her best, and therefore wants the Empress to recognize him if the prince can walk, use tools, and speak like other people. Obviously, the villain scoffs, asking if the princess thinks she can tame a beast, to which a confident Irina says she can show that he is not an animal. Then they finalize the agreement. If he does all of this, the Empress promises to recognize them. And with that, she will pass on to the princess the Azure Flame Dream, an heirloom necklace from the royal family that has been passed down among the women of the family since ancient times. If the princess wears the necklace at social events, it is practically a declaration that she has the Empress's support. If this happens, not only will the first prince be treated as human, but he will also be the strongest candidate to inherit the throne. Approaching the princess, the Empress concludes by saying that this is more than enough of the recognition the princess desires. As she departs, the Empress warns that the time limit will be 3 months until the summer banquet. Warning that there is a catch, she hates lies. So if by any chance the princess tries to deceive the Empress, she will be coldly punished. After this madness, Irina returns to her quarters with Defina's help due to the long walk. And as if that weren't enough, on the way, a male voice catches both of their attention. It is Matthias saying that he heard the princess tamed that lunatic, so he expected to see a more strong-willed woman. However, she is more ordinary than he imagined. He approaches, noticing that the poor girl isn't even able to pay attention to him. When she looks up with difficulty, she is startled to see a face so similar to Empress Cornelia's. Matthias asks if the princess is returning after meeting his mother. Trying to stand tall, Irina bows, saying that it is an honor to meet the second prince. The bold one grabs her chin, making her look up, saying that she doesn't need to be so nervous. Stepping away from him, she realizes that the lack of good manners runs in the family, and warns the prince that she did not give him permission to call her by her name. Jokingly, he comments that this is a bit rude, but perhaps he should call her sister-in-law. With a cold look, he stares at the protagonist, who stands paralyzed, not knowing what is happening. Then she manages to step back and says that since he has nothing more to say, she will take her leave. Before she can leave, he grabs her arm, asking her to wait. However, with the force and difficulty of walking, Irina ends up losing her balance, falling right into the arms of the crazy one while he warns her to be careful. The protagonist tries to push him away, asking him to let her go. However, the prince sniffs her neck. Trembling, she asks what he is doing, and speaking in her ear, he asks if that idiot at least knows how to satisfy a woman, stepping back while laughing at Irina's expression, who is perplexed, unable to believe what she just heard. Before leaving, the prince informs the servants that it seems the young lady is having some trouble with her legs, so they should bring the palanquin. Back in her room, Irina vents her frustration on the poor pillow, still unable to believe the disrespect of that disgusting man, saying that she had never in her life heard something so vulgar from anyone. While glaring at the bed in anger, she hears someone calling her Ren. However, she remembers that when she entered, there was no one in the room. When she looks down, the prince is covered in dust and holding the pillow, happy to see her. She questions what happened to him and if he had been under the bed all this time. Wiping his face, Irina comments that the staff probably only cleaned what was visible and left a lot of things dusty, especially under the bed. Relieving her frustration, she uses the prince as emotional support and starts laughing at the grimace she made him make. The poor guy just stares at her, not understanding anything. The protagonist comments that he really had a very funny face. She begins to remember everything she has experienced in the splendid place that is the palace, where she does not fit in, having to face many malicious looks. Besides the malicious looks from the Empress and her son, it seems they are just waiting for a chance to get rid of her. However, when she looks at Caesar, she feels good and free, which he himself has no idea what she is thinking. Irina tells the prince that this way it won't work. He is all covered in dust, and she promised that she would show her human side to everyone, so things need to change. After ringing the bell, Mercedes appears, asking what the princess would like, saying that she had been looking for the prince all this time. Irina comments that she believes Caesar needs a bath. However, seeing Mercedes' surprise at the mention of the bath, the protagonist realizes that it might not be something very common for him. Mercedes hesitates to respond, but then says it's no problem and will prepare the bath quickly, calling the prince to accompany her. Irina stays on the bed, waving for him to go calmly while she waits. She was a bit worried seeing Mercedes' hesitation, but believes that nothing could happen since it was just a bath. A scream arises, going against what she had just thought, which startles Irina. Suddenly, the door opens and the scene leaves the protagonist embarrassed. The prince came out completely naked from the bathroom. Upon seeing Irina, he simply runs and hugs her, completely naked. Totally embarrassed, she asks what happened. The poor guy, not knowing what to say, just makes a pitiful face, while the other is looking down with impure thoughts, only able to think that they are very close to each other. Mercedes appears running with a towel behind the prince, explaining that bathing is really quite difficult, which leaves the protagonist shocked that he had never taken a decent bath before. Mercedes explains that he always does this when they try to splash a little water on him. However, the protagonist knows very well if he can't take a simple bath, it will be very difficult for him to act like a human. Irina says that she will help, which catches Mercedes off guard, saying that as a princess, how will she know how to help the prince with his bath? While tying her hair up, the protagonist knows that she has done many manual tasks, but she has really never bathed anyone. However, since helping others is part of marriage, she decides to try. Inside the bathroom are two servants, Mercedes, Irina, and the prince, all there to give him a bath. What the prince doesn't seem comfortable with at all is the people and the story of the bath. But our protagonist is determined, and she will make him act like a human, so he does need to take a bath. One of the servants says he will start pouring the water, and at that moment, Caesar begins to resist. And while shouting no, he ends up attacking the servant with his dragon hand, which knocks over the bucket and injures him. Irritated, he starts yelling at the prince, calling him cursed, and Irina sees that a lot of blood is flowing, so worried that this will activate the prince's crazy mode. She shouts for everyone to stop at that exact moment and tells the two servants to leave. Irritated, the injured one and the other leave. Mercedes asks if the young lady is okay. What she says is yes, but even being careful, this incident still happened. Mercedes then comments that this is why she hesitated when talking about the bath, since it is simply not possible to bathe the prince. He hates it so much, and she has seen it firsthand that it's true. Mercedes then says she will take the prince to change clothes since he will not take a bath. Irina then decides to approach it differently and asks Mercedes to wait. She says that even having judged wrong, it doesn't mean they should give up, as they need to finish the bath properly. The lady retorts that it is absolutely impossible, but the princess says she will indeed make him take a bath. There is a tense atmosphere between the two. Irina asks the prince to come closer. Desperate, Mercedes asks what the princess is trying to do, and she says that she made a promise to the empress that she will make Caesar into a human, like everyone else. The lady tries to argue that this promise the protagonist made doesn't even make sense. However, Irina will not give up and says that this is exactly what the prince needs, to show everyone that he is capable and that he is a human being. Unable to argue, Mercedes ends up conceding, saying that she will leave him in the princess's care and leaving before the princess can contest. After Irina saw how the servants treat the prince, she now understands why Mercedes is so protective of him. She is probably the only person who has taken care of him for decades, besides being the only person who cares at least a little about him. Irina hopes she hasn't irritated her by wanting him to act a bit differently. Looking at the prince drying himself with the towel, Irina sits in front of him and asks why he hates baths so much. However, the prince just shakes his head, saying he doesn't want to, like a child. The protagonist believes there must be some reason behind his dislike for bathing. So she tries to tell him that taking a bath is sometimes nice, since the bath warms you up, refreshes you, and then leaves you smelling good, which wasn't very convincing for the prince. Putting her hand in the hot water, she shows him that getting into the hot water is a way to make his body relax, which even makes him a little interested. Then, Irina realizes something. Maybe he just doesn't like taking baths because of the servants who have always mistreated him. She then warns him that if he really doesn't like those people giving him a bath, he needs to learn to bathe by himself. And for that, she says she will teach him, and that afterwards he will probably be able to do it alone. She takes a little water in her hand and tells them to start slowly, pouring this water slowly on his hand, which he seems to not like very much, but is accepting. Noticing that he got a little irritated, Irina realizes that when the blood of that servant flowed, it didn't seem like the prince became as fixated as he does with her blood, and maybe blood isn't the trigger to turn him into that dragon blood beast. She takes the bucket and says that this time she will pour the water a little higher. While pouring the water on the prince, she asks if it was that bad. However, the image she has is somewhat pleasant, and even she is impressed that he can look so different. For a moment, she feels embarrassed, realizing that if she is going to teach him to bathe, she will also need to be without clothes. The prince, seeing that she turned red, calls her by the nickname, not understanding why she is like that. But our protagonist can only look at some specific places on the prince, since she is not foolish. She approaches him holding the robe and says that he must always keep the robe covering his body. What leaves the prince more confused is that he is taking a bath and she told him not to take off his clothes, what the poor guy just repeats, as if it were a rule. But the embarrassment is greater, and she says that's right. So he always needs to keep his clothes intact so she doesn't slip or open up. Even after that, Irina can only think that she will still have to show him how to take a bath, precisely because he usually learns by imitating, just like he did when she showed him how to eat with a fork. So she starts to undress, saying that it's all because she needs to teach him. We know it's not, but that's okay. She asks the prince to turn around now that she is ready, and even he is surprised when she turns to him. And here you are thinking that a naked woman will appear in this story, but it won't, because our protagonist isn't going to take off her clothes that easily. She is wearing underwear that is somewhat transparent because it's wet and all. But this is the maximum, right, folks? A romance story, there won't always be any raunchiness. Irina's complex, in fact, is her heel, which was precisely an injury she had as a child in a supposed accident, where her sister pushed her down the stairs and even said that Irina was responsible and tripped on her own. Obviously, the people in the house turned against her, especially because the staff looked at her as if she were some kind of insect, and her adoptive mother and sister clearly hated her. You wonder where this child's father was? Well, her biological father spent more time at banquets and nightclubs than at home, so that's why no one cared about her accident. And when she was found in the basement many days later, her leg was already damaged. Because of this, she suffered a lot of mistreatment, where they even said that if anyone touched her, that person would also end up limping, which is why she was afraid the prince would think her leg was also dirty. But of course, Caesar is not conventional at all. The first thing he did was smell her clothes that were on the floor. She asked him to stop doing that and to pay attention to how to take a bath, realizing that all her concerns about her leg or her appearance made no sense at all, which she didn't know if it was a good or bad thing. She decides to show him how to get into the bathtub, showing that first you dip the lower part of your body and then sit inside the bathtub, saying it's very cozy. The prince watches, clearly no longer following the rule of fixing the robe, and only agrees when she asks if it feels comfortable. She then splashes a bit of water on his face, which catches him completely off guard. But with the protagonist's laughter, he seems not to be angry at all, which she found quite cute. Taking his hand, Irina invites him to get into the bathtub, which he seems a bit reluctant about, but he ends up getting into. With both of them in clothes inside the bathtub, she asks him if it's not that bad. The protagonist says she prefers things when they are clean, so she shows that it's normal to scrub your body to clean yourself, saying she would like him to smell nice too. Putting a bit of vanilla lavender essence in the bathtub, she asks him to smell it and see how pleasant it is. The prince says that the smell is indeed good, and here we have the first sentence from our prince. Upon coming into contact with the soap, his hand wound starts to sting, which makes the prince anxious, as it changed the way she was in the environment. For a moment, Irina worries that he is wanting blood again, but he holds her hand and kisses the wound that is stinging. She realizes that his touch is much gentler than when he is looking for blood, and he is probably trying to make a gesture as if he wants that wound to heal. She thanks him while stroking his hair, making him look like a happy puppy for having done the right thing. Thus, they continue the explanations of the bath on how to wash the hair, use the soap. Irina realizes that now there is only one thing left to wash. Exactly, that thing is under the robe. Embarrassed, she realizes she doesn't have the courage to wash something that is totally private to him, so she quickly gets up from the bathtub and leaves, saying that he can take care of the rest by himself, which the poor guy, I believe, has no idea what she was referring to, gets a bit irritated that she is leaving. So he pulls her clothes, telling her not to go. What ends up tearing her clothes because of the dragon's claw, Irina quickly enters the bathtub to hide her body, saying that he can't do that. The prince simply repeats the word no, as if to say that he wouldn't want her to come out of there. The protagonist says that even so, he can't just tear her clothes and warns that if he washes himself properly, she will give him a reward, which he seems to have understood and gotten excited about. Irina instructs him to wash himself as she taught him and to dry himself properly. That way, he will earn a reward. He asks for something good, but in reality, she doesn't know exactly what she should give him. Caesar says he wants one thing. Taking her hand, he places it on his face, saying, "He wants this." What the protagonist understands is that he is trying to say he would like to receive affection from her. Agreeing, she says that if he does everything right, that is what he will have. The next day, Mercedes is impressed with what she just heard. While stroking the prince, the protagonist tells that yesterday he washed himself and changed on his own. Proudly, she says that Mercedes would have liked to see how he did it right. However, the lady seems to disagree, blaming the princess for having dismissed her and not even having helped Her Majesty. Believing that for an adult it would be better to learn to bathe alone, Irina cannot understand what the problem is. Mercedes says that the prince is not like the others, being much more sensitive and therefore needs to be cared for with great attention, saying that they were lucky nothing happened, but she shouldn't do that again. Irina agrees that it was a bit reckless, but still finds it strange the way Mercedes talks about things. Changing the subject, the lady asks what the terms of the promise with the empress were. The princess replies that in 3 months they both must attend the banquet together. Because of this, starting today, Irina will teach the prince good manners. Contrary to what the protagonist imagined, Mercedes simply agreed, and says that if she needs anything, she will be available to help, which, no matter how strange it seems, the protagonist doesn't have much to say at the moment. Sometime later, Irina explains the situation to Delphina, saying that she will need her help. In fact, the plan to make Caesar presentable doesn't need to be perfect, since it is completely impossible to transform him in just 3 months. However, as long as he can walk on his own, use utensils, and speak, a noble doesn't need to sit throughout the entire banquet. What they do most is greet people, sit, and eat while showing a pleasant smile. So that is what he needs to do to manage to deceive everyone during the short time of the banquet. For this, Irina will need someone who knows the royal etiquette very well. That's why, as she heard that Delphina worked in the adornment when she was in the Moon Palace, out of gratitude for having been saved, Delphina says she will do whatever is necessary for the princess. Normally, there is a specific tailor who takes care of the royal garments. Since Prince Caesar hasn't worn or collaborated in wearing formal clothing until now, he doesn't have anything of that kind. Delphina also remembers that the princess needs to wear something elegant with the prince, but Irina was thinking of wearing something she already owned. Still, the maid disagrees, saying it is important to have a new dress made for a special occasion. However, the guard interrupts their conversation, saying that someone has come to see the princess. The countess enters the room, bowing to the princess, who questions the reason for the visit. She then, with a mischievous look, signals for the maid to bring the gifts. Quickly, dozens of luxury items such as clothes, dresses, jewelry, and perfumes enter the room. The countess indicates that these are gifts sent by the empress. Irina does not interpret the good intention, as she is probably plotting something. Elvira says that the empress was impressed with the way the princess cares for her husband and therefore would like to help the two. It seems a bit suspicious, but Irina cannot simply refuse the empress's gift. The countess then says that the empress and she will help with whatever is necessary. Therefore, later she won't be able to say that she couldn't fulfill the promise due to lack of support. It is obvious that the Viper had other intentions. The protagonist then says that will surely live up to Her Majesty the Empress's grace. Saying goodbye, the countess says she will send the message. However, a commotion begins to happen in the Jade Palace. The maids run back and forth working. All of this because before the countess left, Irina ordered that all the servants be changed to respect the prince, so she would have the necessary support. Thus, Elvira followed the orders and replaced all the staff with those who were well-trained. Later at dinner, a variety of dishes and a very nice appearance are on the table. Irina realizes that even the food and its presentation have improved after the changes. Still, it is not a complete banquet, but it is much better than what they had before. What is the perfect setting to teach Caesar and Mercedes seems to be cooperating. However, she notices that something is wrong, and she questions what the two are doing. Mercedes, not understanding, asks what the problem is. The protagonist says that the lady cannot keep treating Caesar as if he were a child and needs to let him cut and eat things by himself. Obviously, she feels hurt and questions whether the princess is ordering her not to help the prince. For the 1000th time, Irina tries to explain that she only needs to help and not do everything for him, besides that she will teach him good manners. She will be the princess. Even so, Mercedes argues that the prince is very sensitive, so it would be good to take advantage of the days he is eating well since he needs to stay healthy. The protagonist says she understands, but even so, he needs to do this by himself. Ignoring the princess, the nanny tries once again to feed the prince, but she is interrupted by Irina and ends up dropping the food on the floor. Shocked, the old woman tries to argue. However, fed up with having to do all this and still explain herself to that woman, the protagonist turns to the prince who is quietly sitting at the table and places the fork in his hand, saying that, as he saw her doing last time, he needs to start using this to eat. However, it is obvious that it would not be so easy because he ends up throwing the fork far away. Obviously, this makes Mercedes super happy, offering to help the prince. But before she can try to do anything, the princess shouts, "No," and calls Delphina, who promptly brings a new utensil to use. Irina says they will need to repeat several times until the prince understands and can use it by himself. She places it in Caesar's hand and tells him that this time, he should not throw the fork away, which seems like the prince understood. Mercedes seems bothered by the changes the princess is making. However, the prince throws the utensil on the floor again. Irina even jokes, asking if he thinks this is a game and to try again, this time seriously. And the prince even seems to be having fun with all these new skills he is learning. And while Irina explains to the prince what he should do, how he should hold it, and even how to respond when she asks a question, Mercedes becomes increasingly irritated with the situation. Noticing that the lady is acting a bit strange, the protagonist asks if she is okay. Then, Mercedes questions whether the princess said she is going to the banquet with Prince Caesar. The strange feeling appears again. Irina tries to ignore it and just agrees, saying that this is the plan. Distilling her hatred for the change, Mercedes questions the princess whether this is her wish or if the prince wants this too, to which Irina disagrees, saying that it is certainly not just her wish. Reaching her limit, Mercedes begins to scream, saying that the princess knows absolutely nothing about the prince and how he has lived all these years. And because of that, she is not considering what this could cause him. Irina tries to understand Mercedes' selfish desire to keep things the same, but she believes that this change is necessary, even if it hurts. And since no achievement comes without pain or scars, she believes this is what Caesar really needs, which leaves Mercedes completely out of control and incredulous at what she just heard. Chaos ensues, with Mercedes crying, the prince not understanding anything, and Irina trying to argue that it will be necessary and that she has to understand. Out of control, Mercedes questions whether the princess is trying to turn a prince into a joke. But Irina does not understand the reason for all the commotion. It is something necessary? The prince is already an adult and needs to behave as such. Either that lady knows something that only she is aware of, or something is very wrong given the outburst she is having in this situation. She tries to ask Mercedes to calm down, but the only thing that comes out of her mouth is that she will not allow this to happen and will do everything to protect the prince. Finally, the protagonist understands that this affection that Mercedes has for the prince is more of a twisted affection, like a poison. And that's why she had that feeling that something was wrong, especially because of the way Mercedes treated the prince like a child. After the discovery of the curse, most people rejected him, even his own mother, the former empress. With her fragile health, she simply went mad and took her own life. That's why Mercedes was the only one who accepted him in his childhood. The problem is that she has a peculiar temperament, always very emotional, and her moods swing to extremes depending on how she is feeling. It's even understandable. If he received this treatment since he was little, that's probably why he hasn't matured to this day. One thing the princess is sure of is that that woman is not helping at all in the prince's development. And for that reason, she tells Mercedes that from now on, she will no longer need her help. Those words were like breaking everything that was left for Mercedes. But the protagonist did not back down and says that the request for help she made last time is being withdrawn at this moment. Mercedes, still shaken, can't even respond. And to conclude, the princess said that from now on, things will be just between her and Caesar. Please, no more interruptions. After things calm down in the dining room, the two return to the quarters where the prince is resting in Irina's lap. She thinks that 17 forks were sacrificed at this dinner, and how stubborn he is to learn things. She remembers that after everything, Mercedes did not return to their quarters. At that moment, she simply ran out of the dining room and probably won't show up anytime soon. The protagonist believes that this was the best choice for the future, but she wonders what the prince thinks about it. So she decides to ask him. It doesn't hurt to try, right? Asking if he didn't like the princess making Mercedes leave. However, he only responds with a hum, and she doesn't quite know if that's a yes or a no. But since he is quite decisive when he doesn't like something, it's more likely to be a yes. She then holds his face and says that now is the moment. If they want to avoid the eyes of the staff, this is the chance. At that moment, that bloodthirsty look appears in the prince's eyes. Later that night, Irina seems unable to sleep, and she realizes that the wound on her heel has diminished a bit. For some reason, the prince manages to maintain control after consuming blood. That's why she decided to constantly feed him with her blood to keep him stable. It's still uncertain how he will react to the blood of another person, but to keep this a secret, this is the safest method. However, there is just one problem. Since she usually can't hide the wound, she decided to let him bite her heel, where she already has an injury. Because if someone sees it, it's a place that is usually not strange to have a wound, and for that reason, she could come up with an excuse. Ironically, the protagonist wonders if she should be grateful for that injury. Even a useless body like this managed to be useful. His name is Ren. The protagonist realizes that, in fact, he was talking while he slept, looking at him. She can't understand how anyone could imagine that he is cursed. The protagonist raises her hand to caress the prince's hair. At that moment, she remembers Mercedes' words, questioning whether this was the prince's will or just hers. At that moment, she was able to be sure of her answer, precisely because she saw parts of what his life was like before. And that's why she is sure that that environment and how he was treated did not belong to him. Since he deserves a much warmer and kinder place because he is a person who deserves all of this, therefore, to make this happen, all this process is necessary. Irina makes sure that everything goes well. In her room, Mercedes is still trying to recover from the shock. She remembers someone saying that she was the one who raised Caesar since he was little. Because of that, he is practically her son. And with a manic expression, she says that no one will come between them. Not even that arrogant girl. In another mansion, someone violently opens the door, calling for her mother. This is Giovannetta Flores, the eldest daughter of the Duchy of Flores. The girl questions whether it is true that Irina is still alive, to which the Duchess simply tells her daughter to lower her voice, that this is very lacking in class. Ignoring the advice, the girl continues shouting, asking why she hadn't been informed, since she had even selected the dress, hat, and gloves for the funeral. The Duchess asks her daughter not to keep saying those things, as it is possible that unpleasant rumors may start. After all, that girl has always been strange. Even when she was little, when she was bullied or pinched, she didn't make a sound or cry. When everyone in the house let her go hungry, she survived by eating the leftover dirt mixed with breadcrumbs in the garden. If by chance she was given an impossible homework assignment and punished through the tutor, she would stay awake all night memorizing the entire book. The Duchess remembers that if perhaps that child had cried and begged, they might have had more sympathy. Responding to her daughter, she assures her not to worry, as her mother will not let anyone be better than her own daughter. With that, she tells Giovanetta to start getting ready since they will soon go to the Imperial Palace to be by the Empress's side. A woman with blue hair shouts, asking why she has to marry someone in this way. She is the only daughter of the Pilgrim Marquis. Coughing up blood, she wonders if this would be a punishment for causing a scene to get married, and she questions what she did so wrong to deserve this. The protagonist wakes up startled with the prince calling her, and she starts coughing desperately after that nightmare. She wonders if she is really alive after seeing so much blood coming out while coughing in her dream. The prince wipes her tears, telling her to wake up. The protagonist seems to finally realize that César is there by her side and that all of that was just a dream. Even so, the feeling of not being able to breathe is still real, which makes her question if it really was a dream. Placing his hand on Irina's head as if trying to comfort her. In vain. The prince just repeats that everything is okay, and Irina remembers that she did this herself earlier. Probably why he is copying, which makes her very happy, and she thanks him. Even feeling a little better, Irina still doesn't understand why she keeps having these strange dreams. The prince simply says the word clean. What Irina doesn't quite understand what he is trying to say. Looking like a little puppy waiting for its reward, the protagonist still tries to understand what he was trying to say. He then holds her face and pulls her with his head on his shoulder. She feels embarrassed but can smell something, a smell of lavender. And the prince says, Ren likes this. Irina agrees and finally realizes that what he was trying to show is that he took a bath by himself. Happy that he managed to get the message across, he asks if he did well. Extremely happy, the protagonist feels proud to see that César, the person who hated even touching water, took a bath by himself. And she says that he did well. Very well. Then, all happy, he places Irina's hand on his face, asking her to give him that, which was the reward she had promised before. But to her surprise, Irene, instead of petting him, moves closer to him. And here we are left wondering if it was a kiss on the cheek, a kiss on the mouth, or a kiss somewhere we don't know. So let's leave it to everyone's imagination. Because of this image, I am considering it on the mouth, or almost. Embarrassed, the protagonist says that this, in fact, is a type of greeting in some capitals. And not knowing exactly what she did, the protagonist just acted on impulse, as the prince seemed so cute that she acted without thinking. In return, and showing that he learned, Caesar gives her a kiss on the cheek, not understanding why he did that. She says again that it was just a greeting, but it seems that our innocent prince is not so innocent after all because he simply says that he likes her. Believing that liking, probably from his perspective, is not romantic, Irina just responds that she likes him very much too, and for the first time, she realizes that she likes him, even though he can be scary sometimes or even hurt her. How could someone not like such sincere and pure affection as his? The next morning, Delphina comments that the princess has been coughing lately, but ignoring this comment, Irina decides to ask a question, questioning about the other brides the prince has had and what they were like. She asks Delphina to be honest, as the question is also being sincere. The maid replies that she didn't get to know any of them personally, but she heard how they acted while they were there. Each of the 4 brides stayed at the Imperial Palace to receive prenuptial education. However, there were constantly conflicts with Mrs. Aranzo, especially the 4th candidate, the daughter of the Pilgrim Marquis. She caused a scene during the ceremony, which left Mrs. Aranzo furious, saying that the scene was because she didn't want to marry this way. Irina knows that the Peregrino family is a very renowned family, but she doesn't understand why that surname seems familiar, until she remembers her nightmare with that blue-haired girl. Clearly, during the nightmare, she heard the name Peregrino, and even the situation she saw matches the information from Delphina. Irina wonders how this could be possible. It really wasn't just any dream. Delphina comments that the princess doesn't seem to be very well and questions if she should light a calming incense for her. The protagonist realized that something similar happened not long ago when Delphina was falsely accused, and she only managed to discover the true culprit because of the dream she had earlier. So she asks Delphina if by any chance she knows how Miss Peregrino died. The maid hesitates to speak, as this is a delicate subject. The rumor that circulated was that the woman, who almost became the princess heir, was killed by the hands of the cursed prince, and until now, people believe this to be true, and she questions if Caesar could really be capable of killing that young lady. Even though he had some aggressive moments, it always seemed like he was just trying to protect himself and not hurt others. Moreover, the prince she has seen so far couldn't have done that. Delphina tries not to answer the question, saying that someone like her couldn't know this, Irina, then realizing that she won't get answers, apologizes for the question, insisting that Delphina forget what was said. It creates a somewhat awkward atmosphere, and the princess decides to ask how Mercedes is doing. Delphina says she heard that she hasn't left her room since morning. Irene wonders if, by any chance, she is still in shock from what happened. She appears calm and kind on the outside, but there is really something very strange about her. So, the protagonist asks Delphina what kind of person Mrs. Aranzo is. The maid simply replies that she cares a lot about the prince, but sometimes her love is a bit excessive. Irina agrees with exactly the words Delphina used and thanks her for her honesty. A few days later, Irina is looking for Cesar around the Jade Palace, as today is the day to start the new lesson. She hears someone calling her from afar, and when she looks to where the voice came from, she is startled to see that he is simply at the top of the palace tower. Desperate, she asks him to be careful, while the prince is calm, as if he were in his natural habitat. He then jumps towards her, afraid of what might happen to him. Irene just closes her eyes, hoping that the worst doesn't happen. Opening her eyes, terrified to see what really happened. He is intact and all happy in front of her. The poor girl can barely breathe and falls to the ground after this shock. The prince becomes worried, asking if she is okay, but she just responds by calling him an idiot, asking why he would do something like that. Since he could get seriously hurt, not understanding the reason for so much concern, the prince just says that everything is fine. But Irina seems to have really been traumatized and keeps questioning how he says everything is fine, considering he could have hurt himself jumping from that height. The poor guy can barely speak, so he just makes a sad face and repeats that everything is fine. She then asks him to never do that again, to which he sadly agrees. Realizing how high the castle tower is, Irina is impressed that he jumped from that height and is completely intact. Moreover, she wonders how the prince managed to climb so high and why no one stopped him from doing that. Then, the guards appear, greeting the princess. Irina then asks them if they were aware that Cesar was on top of the tower and jumped from that height to get there. As there was no response, she asks again. The guard laughs, as if mocking what she asked, saying he didn't quite understand what she meant by that, affirming that there is no problem since nothing happened. Irritated that they clearly don't care about the prince's safety or respect him, Irina says she will report this immediately, which only made the guards laugh at her. That same bold guard asks who exactly she is going to report to which Irene replies that it is to the Empress. Then, he warns that Her Majesty just ordered to let things run smoothly in that place. That moreover, she made it clear that she would not listen to complaints unless the prince himself reported it. And still mocking, the guard questions whether the poor prince can at least speak. The protagonist becomes outraged. It is too much insolence and disrespect. She then asks if he is not afraid to speak ill of the heir prince in this way. To prioritize the situation, he even says that the princess really does not understand how the world works. That if something were to happen to her, or even if she disappeared, no one would care. The number would just go from 4 to 5. Although it was completely disrespectful, Irina knows that what he said is not entirely wrong. After all, the fact that she is still alive after all the rumors about the last 4 brides is stranger to people than the opposite. The cursed prince would again be blamed, and there would still be people saying it was better this way, since she died after receiving a higher noble status. She even thought about this reason before going there. Moving forward, the guard questions whether the princess really wants to disappear without anyone noticing, or if she is doing this just to get attention. But before he finishes the sentence, a dragon's hand goes up against him. The other guards become desperate, and even Irina becomes worried about the prince's behavior. As he grabs the guard by the neck, Cesar does not seem the least bit concerned about what will happen to this guard. The protagonist is worried because at this moment, it may be that Cesar really kills someone for the first time. While the others try to free the prince's hand, Irina screams for him to stop, but he just looks at her with that dragon gaze. She realizes that this is a side of him she does not know, the wild side that has always been hidden, and she is afraid she won't be able to stop him. Maybe she was almost sure of who the prince really was. But seeing this scene, she questions whether this is the person she knows. And indeed, maybe she was wrong in not knowing him completely, but still, she will not let him kill someone. So again she screams, asking him not to do it, afraid that if he crosses this line, he will really become the monster everyone talks about. Crying, she begs him, please to stop. And finally, it seems he heard her, releasing the guard to the ground. The others now seem to want to take revenge on the prince, but Irina asks them to leave. After the guards withdraw, the princess hugs Cesar and says that he really managed to hold back that instinct, and that everything is fine now, that he does not need to worry anymore. Holding her shoulders, he pushes her away, and Irina tries to understand what he is trying to say. Noticing that he is calmer, the prince just nods as if he is really saying that it has passed and he is no longer nervous. Then, the princess thanks him. It seems to be the first time Cesar hears this word, so he just repeats it without knowing the meaning. Irina says she thanks him for listening to her, and also for defending her. After all, if he hadn't gotten involved, something worse could have happened to her. Even so, she says he should not attack people this way, to which the prince questions why not. Irina is confused about what to answer because he probably will not be satisfied with just saying that it is common sense. So she says it is because she does not want him to hurt other people, and if he can do this for her. But Cesar seems sad and says that she would get hurt. Surprised that he is expressing his feelings, he continues saying that he does not want Ren to get hurt, completing the sentence by saying, doing something bad to Ren, wanting to show that he will always defend her. The protagonist realizes that the reason Cesar was angry was not because she would physically hurt herself, but because she was offended, which moves her. Still a little annoyed, he says that those guys were bad people. It is the first time someone gets angry to defend her in her whole life. Even so, she tells the prince that he still has to hold back, as something worse could have happened. However, in the middle of the sentence, she starts to laugh, leaving the prince confused. The truth is that Irina cannot give him a lesson while he looks at her with the face of a puppy proud of having done something right. And that is exactly how he is still looking at her, which makes her wonder if there could be a prince as cute and kind as he is. After the incident, the head of the guard disappeared from his post without any mention or punishment, probably the work of the empress. However, after the event, Irina is now sure of her next steps, and one of his begins now with the new lesson for Caesar to learn. He seems to have never heard the word study, so he gets a little confused. To really execute the plan perfectly, Caesar will need to speak normally with other people, but the prince can't even put words into a sentence correctly. So the plan is to make him learn to write so he can speak better, and she starts with a card game, showing a cute card of a dog. However, the prince doesn't seem very interested in dogs. She then shows the cat card asking what he thinks. Shaking his head, the prince shows that he doesn't like it either. Continuing the lesson, Irina shows that by combining letters it is possible to form words and teaches him how to write his name. Seeing that he also wasn't very excited, she shows how his name is formed. For the first time, the prince picks up one of the cards showing the letters R-E-N. Irina is shocked because this is his nickname that he always uses. It's amazing that he knows how to spell it. She asks if he knows anything else, to which the prince says he knows everything, pointing to girl, marriage, beautiful cake while repeating aloud. The protagonist is really impressed because she didn't think he would know so much. Probably that's why he wasn't interested, since it was too easy, so she decides to speed things up, which clearly leaves the prince not excited at all. But going against all expectations, he does everything correctly. Irina notices that he struggled at first, but after a little while, he is already writing comfortably. She asks if he would like to write on paper now. Positioning the quill in his hand, the protagonist shows him how he should hold it to write on the paper. And throughout the day, they practice writing and new words. Until he finally finishes the entire lesson, Irina is very impressed because not only did he do everything right, it turned out perfect. Looking closely, she realizes that he is not only good at writing, but could even be considered better than her. Caesar's handwriting has dignity and composure. She wonders how she didn't notice this before, but it is clearly signs that he has received education previously. As the first prince of the empire, he is most likely to inherit the throne. He must have had a strict education and imperial training since he was little. Although his mind is a bit messy due to the curse, the signs of education he received are still intact. Irina wonders what other admirable qualities are hidden behind this curse. Emotional and proud, she hugs him, which makes the prince very happy. She asks him what exactly this curse is. However, caught by surprise, the prince just repeats the word curse. The only thing known about this curse is through an ancient legend passed down from generation to generation by the royal family. It is part of the myth of the founding of the Assetria Empire. But even that had turned into an ancient legend that dragon supposedly died hundreds of years ago. How great was its resentment to keep this curse active for so long? If there is one thing Irina is sure of, it is that Caesar does not deserve to be treated this way. Later, Irina decides to tell a story to help with the prince's vocabulary. The story was as follows. Once upon a time in a certain lake, there lived a beautiful couple of ducklings. As a result of their love, they laid several eggs. However, one of those eggs was different, big and ugly, which became a concern for the couple of ducklings. Even so, they believed it was just a small difference, so they kept it warm and safe. However, the duckling that hatched from that different egg was also different from his siblings. He had strange feathers and a black beak. Everything about him seemed wrong. The duckling that was born from that different egg was the ugly duckling. The story resembled that of the prince, where even the mother duck, whom he trusted, abandoned him. Just like the people who judged the prince for the curse in the story, the grandmother, all the other siblings, even the cat, everyone tormented the ugly duckling. Thus, the duckling fell into despair and lost all hope. Who in the world could love something so ugly? These were also the words of one of the prince's brides. One of them decided to take her own life to punish her parents for putting her in that situation. She ran towards the lake, but upon arriving there, she began to regret her choice. How could she leave because of a mistake that wasn't hers? But when she took a few steps back, regretting her choice, someone pushed her into the lake, and not knowing how to swim, calling for help, the only thing she received was more hatred from a person pushing her into the water, telling her to stop resisting and just go away once and for all. The girl felt a pain and wanted it to stop, and if it were a dream, to wake up from it. Thus, once again, our protagonist wakes up from her nightmare. She realizes that it has been some time since she's been having nightmares every day that week, and always related to the prince's former brides. Before, she believed they were very strange scenes that made no sense. But knowing the story, she now realizes what was happening. Sometimes it was a pillow pressed against her face. Other times, a vicious hand pushing her underwater. Physical aggression also occurred, and even poisoned food. The only unusual thing in all these dreams is that the person she is in the dream is always a candidate to be the prince's bride. The protagonist always ends up waking up when the end of that dream arrives. They were all going crazy, just like the protagonist, in the same position. And perhaps if she had been named the prince's bride a little earlier, that would probably have been her fate. Are these nightmares just products of her anxiety? Or is she really losing her mind? The prince calls her, diverting her from those thoughts. And then he kisses her on the cheek, which makes Irina feel more at ease, saying that everything is fine. Even so, Caesar questions whether she is really okay, which the princess confirms and thanks him for waking her up. Since that day, every time she has a nightmare, the prince always wakes her up, not knowing exactly why, but every time he wakes her from a nightmare, he gives her a kiss on the cheek. She then asks how he always knows, since at night he always goes to her room and wakes her up at the moment she is having a nightmare. She then asks how he always knows, since at night he always goes to her room and wakes her up at the moment she is having a nightmare. The prince is confused by the question, but he answers by saying that he just knows, which is not a very convincing answer for the protagonist, but it seems that this is the most she will get. Lying back in bed, she realizes that she hasn't slept well for days, so she is feeling exhausted. She could just think that those dreams are simply dreams and ignore them. However, what if these dreams are telling her the truth again, just like they showed her who the real culprit of the jewel theft was? Probably what they are trying to show is that all those women were killed by the same person and within the imperial palace. No one has the right to end another's life so cruelly. So who would do something like that? It's not like she could find any evidence, especially because if it was something internal, the people in the palace have already eliminated all the evidence and blamed it on the prince's curse. If only there were at least one witness who happened to see something. At that moment, she remembers something that might actually have a witness. And that person is right in front of her, the prince. Irina tries to question him if he knows anything about the women who came before her and ended up not surviving. However, to her surprise, the prince questions her. Women did not survive? Which leaves the protagonist confused, wondering if he is asking or just repeating what she said. So, Irina tries to explain that someone bad killed them, killed those women, emphasizing that it really had been something bad. Very, very bad. Asking that if he remembers anything, he could tell her. The prince then says the word splash, splash in the water, which makes her realize that it might have been that girl who drowned in her last nightmare. So, she agrees and says that is exactly what she needs to know. And this gave her hope because maybe he knows something about that candidate who fell into the lake. So she asks him to keep talking. However, the prince only says, splash, splash. The little duckling, splashing water, followed the mother duck and quacked, quack, quack. The protagonist was shocked. She didn't understand why the prince changed the subject and told the story of the duckling again. Looking at him, he just smiles, repeating, quack, quack, which makes me think that maybe he does know something, but either doesn't want to tell or is trying to protect her. Because I think he is clever to a certain extent. Trying to understand, the protagonist says that yes, this is a children's story, and maybe the readings she has been doing for him might have disrupted the conversation a bit. The prince continues telling the story, saying that the ugly duckling looked at its reflection in the lake and despaired. What sin did he commit to be born so ugly? Irina comments that the prince must really like this story, which makes her heart ache a little, since it is a story that reminds her a lot of the prince's story. What, apparently to him, makes no sense at all, since he likes the story and keeps looking at her, waiting for her to read the story again. Turning on the light, she says she can't say no to him. Then she takes the book and starts reading the story of the little duck again. The prince interrupts her, asking what exactly love is. Irina, surprised by the question, asks what he said, and the prince repeats the word love again. The protagonist is a bit at a loss for what to answer. How can he ask what love is? It's a very philosophical question and hard to answer. She tries to say that love means liking someone very, very much. Then the prince says that he likes the king very, very much. She smiles, still thinking that he isn't speaking in romantic intentions, which we already know might not be quite that, and says that she also likes him very, very much. Holding a strand of her hair, he says that he loves her. Pulling her hair closer to his mouth, he asks, "And what about her?" The protagonist becomes completely embarrassed and tries to calm her heart, thinking that the prince is just saying this in a pure and innocent way, not knowing the romantic meaning behind it. So she responds that she also loves him, with difficulty due to her embarrassment. The prince is extremely happy with the answer, but Irina quickly changes the subject, saying that they should continue reading. The prince interrupts, asking about the fruit of their love. He also mentions that the fruit of the love of the little ducks produced eggs. Irina realizes that he was referring to the book. Then, in all innocence, he asks when she will lay the eggs, which, obviously, the poor girl didn't understand at all and doesn't really know how to respond. Irina questions what he means by laying the eggs, and the prince replies, "The fruit of love," pointing to the drawing of the eggs in the book, repeating that it is the fruit of love. Then, while smiling at her, he tells her to lay those eggs soon, which leaves the protagonist shocked. Since how is she going to explain to him that humans don't lay eggs, but rather have a child, a baby, without ruining his innocence by explaining how the process of having a baby works? Not quite knowing what to respond exactly and where to start, the protagonist tries to say that maybe she can't lay eggs, but before she can explain anything, he asks how many she can lay, and also how she does that. The poor girl can only imagine that she will have to explain how a woman gets pregnant to him, and she definitely doesn't want to do that. While he is clearly very excited to understand how she lays the eggs, embarrassed and sure that she won't be able to tell him the truth behind the fruit of love, she then says that it is with her hands, which the prince doesn't understand, warning that if they sleep holding hands, the eggs will simply appear. While they hold hands, she still insists that if they sleep like this, the eggs will appear. Irina feels a bit apprehensive about lying to him, but she wouldn't want to break his innocence at that moment, so she believed it would be easier this way. And seeing the prince's expression, it would indeed be very difficult to explain the truth. While they lie down trying to sleep, the princess is sure that from now on, when she reads the stories, she will make a point of skipping over the parts that talk about having the fruit of love. In another place, at the jewelry store, the employees are running back and forth, trying to bring different things to please the young lady. Giovanetta is in the store, which was theoretically the most famous in the empire, but she says she doesn't like anything at all and everything seems a bit dull. The owner, meanwhile, tries to flatter the Duchess, saying that she has a very beautiful daughter. Besides having this beautiful older daughter, she was lucky to have the younger daughter becoming the crowned princess, which clearly irritated the Duchess with that remark. The man tries to rectify the mistake, saying that in terms of beauty and virtue, no one compares to the older daughter, since she has always been the center of attention since her debut in society last year. Now, looking a bit more pleased with what he is saying, the Duchess comments that this time she will need a dress that is worthy of a status as elevated as her daughter's. Since Giovanetta has been chosen to be the Empress's companion and will therefore be entering the palace soon. Back again in the nest of the two lovebirds, the prince asks when Ren will give birth, which catches the protagonist off guard and she doesn't even know what to say. To make matters worse, Delphina, who was present, ended up overhearing and assumed that the princess was pregnant. Embarrassed, she says she will step out to prepare dinner and leave the two alone, leaving before the protagonist can even explain the situation. Turning to the prince, Irina warns him that they had already discussed that this topic should only be talked about when they were alone. Caesar questions why. She then says that it is precisely because it is a private matter between them, and if people overhear, they will end up misinterpreting it, which could lead to a big rumor. Even realizing what he understood, Irina knows she cannot keep this a secret and continue with this lie for the rest of her life. Since that night, Caesar hasn't stopped talking about the fruit of their love and when it will happen. Initially, Irina believed that if she ignored it or took her time with the subject, he would eventually tire of it and lose interest. However, he is more stubborn than he seemed. Caesar calls her, interrupting the princess's thoughts, and asks if he could hold her hand for a little longer. Embarrassed, she agrees but says not now. Later. All happy, he agrees, understanding that they should do this while they are alone and in secret. In the palace corridors, the maids gossip, impressed that the prince spends more time in the princess's quarters than in his own. What they previously thought would require cleaning up another body now seems completely the opposite, as the two appear more like a couple in love than anything else. What seemed like compliments were actually filled with malice when one of the maids commented on who would be crazy enough to stay close to a cursed monster like the prince. But another maid replied that maybe he is good at night. They start to whisper, fearing they will be expelled by the empress, as that is what happened to the last staff. Behind the door, Mercedes listens to everything with hatred for the princess, calling her disgusting and vulgar. Another day, Irina calls Caesar to come closer. The prince is confused, but she says she has a gift for him. Happy, he approaches and asks if it is something good, to which she agrees, saying he will like it. Not knowing what it is, he gets excited thinking it is something good. Embarrassed, Irina takes the item from her back and shows the prince an egg wrapped in a small cloth. Unable to look the prince in the eye, Irina offers the egg to him, saying that she gave life to this egg. The prince is impressed, and I can only think that it would be better if she were honest with him and stopped treating him like a child. He asks if this would be the fruit of their love, to which she agrees but thinks that maybe he hasn't accepted the idea, which even for her was quite absurd. But the poor guy is so innocent that he is super happy to see that he finally has an egg child. Excited, he asks when she laid the egg, to which the lie continues, saying it was this morning. In fact, the protagonist ended up asking Delphina for a bird's egg. Worried, he asks if Ren is okay, and if it was very difficult. Stammering, she replies that she is fine and that it was nothing. After all, Delphina did the work of finding the egg. The innocent prince is totally excited, saying how incredible Ren is for not having felt anything and being perfectly fine. While they stare at the egg, the prince asks if a baby duck will be born from it. Although she wants to just agree with him, that egg is clearly from a chicken, so it is impossible for a duck to come out of it. Sitting down, she says that now that Caesar has seen the egg, it is time for them to read a book. However, the prince is so excited that he grabs the egg and runs out, saying he needs to warm it up. Grabbing a sheet, he explains that he will be careful and will make a nest for the egg. Irina begins to realize that maybe the lie is going too far and reaching a point that is difficult to turn back from. Realizing that he even wants to make a nest for that chicken egg taken from the kitchen. Sitting on the floor and all excited, he shows the egg and says it is important to keep the baby warm. When night falls, Irina is lying in bed, and the poor guy is sitting on the floor with the sheet all day holding that egg. She tells him that if he gets tired, he should just leave the egg there and lie down in bed with her. During the night, while Irina sleeps, the prince is exactly in the same position, saying that he really needs to keep that egg warm and safe, precisely because it is the fruit of their love. And that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this story. It mixes a bit of drama with cute, heartwarming parts. I believe there is still a lot of cool stuff to happen, but the work is still being released, so I did practically everything that was available at the moment. The name of the work is Tame the Monster Prince, and I have completed up to chapter 26. Don't forget to like the video, share, and subscribe to the channel. If it gets a lot of views, I will bring you part 2 as soon as there are new chapters. Kisses, and see you next time.